Welcome back to another episode of Selling Point. Today I want to talk about an article from a book by Weldon Long called Consistency Selling. And in it he talks about a blue-collar guy who is unabashedly unashamed to find needs and fill them, which obviously is certainly something that all of us as salespeople need to make sure that we're doing a good job of. So what I'm going to do today is something very unusual, and that is I'm going to read to you. And the point is that I don't think I could recount the story as well as I can if I just actually read Long's words. So here's the story in its entirety, and then when I finish, I'm going to have several questions, rhetorical questions for you to look inwardly and answer for yourself. So here we go. Effective selling requires a mindset of service. You have to be willing to serve your customers better than your competition. I'd like to share a story from my new book that illustrates the service mindset, and I learned it from Joe the Concrete Guy. For many years, I lived west of Colorado Springs at an elevation of 9,000 feet in the beautiful little town of Woodland Park, Colorado. Each morning, I would drive down the twisting canyon of Ute Pass into Colorado Springs. And as I drove out of town, I used to pass a quaint little breakfast place called the Hungry Bear. Each time I passed the Hungry Bear, I noticed an old white Ford pickup in the parking lot with bold black letters on the side that read Joe the Concrete Guy, along with a phone number. Seeing that pickup every morning kind of brought a smile to my face as I imagined Joe inside eating eggs, drinking coffee, and reading his paper. For some reason, I enjoyed thinking about Joe like that, and I was envious that he had the time to enjoy a leisurely breakfast. After a couple of years of seeing Joe's truck, I was in the yard one day and I realized that I needed some steps poured at the end of my driveway leading up to give me better access to my writing shed. A couple of days later, I pulled into the Hungry Bear and I wrote down Joe's phone number and called him. When he got out to my house a few days later, he looked exactly like I had imagined. He had long bushy hair and a Grizzly Adams beard. He had on shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. There was nothing pretentious or fake about Joe at all. I stood there in my driveway with Joe and explained where I needed the steps. And Joe nodded his head and quietly acknowledged that it would be no problem. Then I asked Joe how much it would cost, and he responded, "Well, that depends on who does it for you." He continued, "If you don't care about whether or not it starts cracking next spring, when the snow melts, I know a guy that'll do it for a few $100. But if you want to use my 40 years of experience pouring concrete in these mountains so that it never cracks, then I'd have to charge you $1,000. I stood mesmerized by Joe's cool and calm demeanor. He wasn't afraid of charging a price that was fair for him. "Well, Joe," I said, "I don't want it to crack, so I guess it's going to have to be $1,000. Joe smiled and then he said, "I appreciate that you understand that I deserve to get paid for what I know and not just for what I do." Just at that moment, Joe turned and slowly looked at the motorcycle trailer that I had parked in the dirt and the rocks next to my driveway. He said, "What's your trailer doing sitting there?" I said, "Well, that's kind of where I park it," I timidly responded. He looked back at me and he said, "You park it there on purpose?" I said, "Yeah, I guess." "Why do you intentionally park your trailer in the dirt and the rocks?" He said, "Well, because the driveway isn't wide enough." To which Joe said, "While I'm out here pouring your steps, I could widen your driveway." And I could see that my budget instantly went from $1,000 to somewhere about $10,000. Was Joe pushy? Was Joe doing high-pressure sales? Was Joe snake oil? Of course not. Joe was the consummate service and sales professional. He identified a problem that I had overlooked, and he offered a solution. Do you think Joe would have given a hoot if I'd have said no to widening the driveway? Do you think his confidence and self-esteem would be in damage because I said no to that project? Of course, not a chance. Joe's confidence in himself and his solutions did not depend 1 ounce on my approval or appreciation of his work. Joe had the service mindset. Find a problem, offer a solution. So once Joe wrote up the paperwork, I told him, you know, Joe, I do sales training for a living, and that was a super effective technique to upsell me. Joe inquired by saying, technique? What technique? Well, you know, that technique where you expertly used it to get the sale from 1,000 to around 10,000. Mr. Long, that was no technique. That was just common sense. Yes, it is, Joe, but as Voltaire once said, common sense is really not so common. Then Joe went all philosophical on me. He said, Mr. Long, take a look at my truck. What does it say on the side of it? Well, it says Joe the Concrete Guy along with a phone number. Exactly, Joe stated. It says Joe the Concrete Guy. He said, it doesn't say Joe the Window, Roofing, Siding, and Concrete Guy. It only says Joe the Concrete Guy. You see, all I do is concrete. It's all I've ever done since my father taught me how to pour concrete in these mountains. And I learned a long time ago that if I'm going to take care of my family, every time I walk onto someone's property, my job is to look for every problem that concrete can solve and let folks know how I can solve it. Bam, drop the mic, Weldon says. You see, Joe's responsibility is your responsibility. When you're with a prospect, your job is to look for every problem that your product or service can solve and let folks know how to solve it. Your responsibility is to serve the customers better than the competition, and doing that is going to require a service mindset. Now, again, I apologize for reading to you. I know that's not something that you probably enjoy, but as you can see now, the tale went a whole lot better me reading it than me trying to just recount it. So let me wind up this session by just asking you 4 simple questions. First off, how did you react to Joe's answer is how much those steps were going to cost? Second question is, how about Joe's response, being paid for what he knows plus what he does? Ring a bell? Third question is, do you always notice problems when you're out doing an inspection or an assessment? And do you always bring up those problems to the prospect that you're talking to? And fourthly, what are your thoughts about Joe's comments about common sense versus an upsell? Well, I hope this made sense to you, and I hope you'll rethink those questions in light of this article that we just talked about, and hopefully it will help you to improve your productivity in what you do in your business. So again, before we go, reach down, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and hit the notify button so that you'll always know when a new episode comes out. And then don't forget to go to the website, RobinsonTrainingSolutions.com, and take a look there. Waltz around there and see what you can find. You may need, if you hadn't already got it, a $12 copy of my book. Sell is not a 4-letter word. So we'll see you next time. Have a great week.